The journey to bring the great struggles of the Second World War to television began in earnest at the turn of the 21st century. In 2001, audiences around the world were introduced to Band of Brothers, a groundbreaking miniseries that chronicled the experiences of Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, part of the 101st Airborne Division. The production was unlike anything television had seen before, blending cinematic realism with deeply human storytelling. Behind this effort were Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg, two filmmakers already renowned for their ability to capture the scale and cost of war through works such as Saving Private Ryan. Their new project set a standard for authenticity and emotional depth, reminding viewers that victory in Europe had been achieved by ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances. 9 years later, the creative partnership turned to the Pacific Theater of Operations, releasing The Pacific in 2010. Whereas Band of Brothers explored camaraderie and brotherhood among paratroopers, this follow-up shifted attention to the unforgiving island campaigns against Imperial Japan. It was a stark, often brutal portrayal of the Marines who fought in some of the most punishing conditions of the war. Together, the two miniseries formed a diptych, presenting both sides of the world conflict through the eyes of those who endured it. Yet there remained a third dimension of the war, one less frequently dramatized but equally crucial to the Allied victory: the air campaign over Europe. Hanks and Spielberg knew that the story of the men who flew in heavy bombers deserved its own stage. It was here that their trilogy would find its completion with Masters of the Air, released in 2024 on Apple TV. The story of the Bloody 100th. The focus of this third installment was the 100th Bombardment Group of the U.S. Army Air Forces, a unit that soon earned the ominous nickname, the Bloody 100th. Based in England, these men flew B-17 Flying Fortresses on daylight bombing missions over occupied Europe and Nazi Germany. Unlike the infantry on the ground, who faced the mud, the cold, and the bullets of ground combat, bomber crews took to the skies, enduring flak, enemy fighters, and the sheer terror of flying through hostile airspace at high altitudes. The missions were harrowing. Often, squadrons had to push deep into enemy territory without the protection of long-range fighter escorts, leaving them vulnerable to waves of Luftwaffe attacks. Casualty rates were devastating, and the survival odds for airmen were alarmingly low, particularly in the early years of the campaign. Despite these dangers, the crews of the 100th pressed forward. They bore the weight of a mission that was both tactical and symbolic, to cripple Germany's industrial capacity while proving that daylight bombing could weaken the enemy's resolve. The story of their courage, loss, and resilience became the foundation for Masters of the Air. Harry Crosby, From Fear to Leadership. Among the figures brought to life in the series was First Lieutenant Harry Crosby, who served as a navigator. His story illustrates not only the personal struggle of adapting to war but also the way ordinary individuals grew into leaders under extraordinary pressure. Crosby was not the ideal image of a fearless airman. He was plagued by airsickness and bouts of anxiety in his early days, yet he persevered. Over time, his determination and intellect carried him forward, and he eventually rose to the rank of major. Crosby remained deployed with the 100th for nearly 2 years, a remarkable length of service considering the rate at which bomber crews were lost. His perspective, marked by vulnerability as well as perseverance, provided the narrative lens through which much of Masters of the Air was told. After the war, Crosby returned to civilian life, eventually becoming a prolific writer and later the director of the Harvard University Writing Center. His reflections gave later generations insight into what it meant to fly over hostile skies and fragile machines, dependent on trust in both equipment and comrades. Brotherhood in the skies. One of the themes that Hanks and Spielberg carried consistently through all three of their World War II projects was the central role of camaraderie. Victory, their works argued, was not only the result of strategy and technology but also of the bonds forged between men who relied on one another in moments of mortal danger. For Crosby, this meant friendships with fellow airmen such as Major Robert Rosie Rosenthal, a pilot whose courage and skill became legendary within the group. Rosenthal flew numerous missions, many of them against daunting odds, and he remained a symbol of resilience within the 100th. His relationship with Crosby underscored how shared experiences in combat could create enduring connections. But perhaps the most central bond portrayed in Masters of the Air was that between Major Gale, Buck, Cleven and Major John, Bucky, Egan. The two men had trained together in flight school and became close companions. Their contrasting personalities, Cleven being reserved and disciplined, Egan more fiery and impulsive, complemented one another in a way that strengthened both. Their friendship was tested in October 1943, when both men were shot down during separate missions. Captured by the Germans, they eventually reunited as prisoners of war at Stalag Luft III, a camp that held many Allied airmen. The months and years of captivity forged their bond even further, ensuring that their story would stand as one of the defining examples of brotherhood under the harshest conditions. The human cost and aftermath. The war did not end neatly for the men of the 100th. For Egan, the years of service were followed by continued duty in the newly established U.S. Air Force, including participation in the Korean War. Tragically, his life was cut short by a heart attack in 1961, at only 45 years old. Cleven, too, continued his military career, serving not only in Korea but also in Vietnam before eventually retiring as a colonel. He lived until 2006, carrying with him the memories of both triumph and hardship. These post-war trajectories highlight an often overlooked aspect of the story. Survival did not guarantee peace. Many veterans carried invisible scars, the weight of experiences that never truly left them. Masters of the Air, by focusing on individuals rather than merely battles, reminded modern audiences of this reality, honoring memory through storytelling. The producers behind the project saw their responsibility not merely as entertainers but as custodians of memory. The men of the 100th had lived through extraordinary circumstances, and many had not returned. To represent them truthfully required rigorous attention to historical detail. Uniforms, aircraft, and settings had to evoke the era with authenticity. Casting was also crucial. The actors needed to embody the spirit of men who had faced overwhelming odds yet remained defined by loyalty and courage. The narrative approach emphasized heart as much as heroism. The bombers of the 100th did not simply destroy enemy targets. They paved the way for the eventual invasion of Europe. Their sacrifice weakened the Nazi war machine, making possible the landings in Normandy and the push toward Germany. This aspect of the war is sometimes overshadowed by ground combat narratives, but as the series underscored, without the relentless pounding from the skies, the Allied advance might have faltered. A trilogy of perspectives. With the release of Masters of the Air, the trilogy of Hanks and Spielberg's World War II productions reached completion. Each installment offered a different perspective. Together, the three works form a comprehensive portrayal of the American experience in the war, each complementing the others while standing as powerful stories in their own right. Conclusion. 8 decades after the events it portrays, Masters of the Air serves as both tribute and reminder. The story of the bloody 100th was one of courage tempered by fear, of men facing some of the most perilous missions in modern military history. Their endurance was not only a matter of duty but of the deep bonds they formed with one another, bonds that sustained them through loss, captivity, and survival. For Spielberg, Hanks, and their collaborators, the project was about more than historical recreation. It was about honoring the memory of men who gave their youth, and in many cases, their lives for a cause greater than themselves. By bringing their experiences to the screen, the series ensures that their legacy endures for future generations, reminding us that the cost of freedom is always borne by individuals with names, faces, fears, and hopes.